Now, firstly, I want to say, when it comes to these sort of topics, I understand for many people they will be controversial, but I'm not trying to cause a scene, I'm not trying to cause a fuss by making titles or topics for videos that might understandably get people in a bad mood. Okay, I'm not the type of person that's looking for salacious content, but I just have to say it as it is. And as a man, whether you know it or not, or whether you agree with it or not, women and children are dependent on men who are willing to update and revolutionize their culture or wherever it is they come from, whatever beliefs they have. The reason why a lot of black men specifically do not get respect from society in general is because a lot of black men have their tongue tied and are afraid to say it and call it as it is. And when black men do come out and say it and call it as it is, without pulling any punches, without, a smiley face to soften the blow, people are in shock because they're not familiar, they're not used to hearing black men come out and say it as it is. And yeah, F the ancestors. Okay? F the ancestors. And again, this is one of those topics where a lot of black people, because of the programming we've been given since birth, a lot of black people are conditioned to uphold and appraise their parents, their older family members as if they are gods. Actually, there is a long cultural history of Africans treating their ancestors, they call it ancestral worship, like gods, literally. If you look up many of these gods in African lore, they were ancestors, they were people who have been deified. So literally, a lot of black people have been ingrained to treat their elders as if they are gods, as if they know it all. On the one hand, that's perfectly okay. And that's, there's nothing wrong with respecting your elders. There's nothing wrong with looking fondly at your generation, at your, lineage, and upholding your roots and all of that. I'm a very traditional person, believe it or not. I'm very fond of history and I have a very traditional view of things. As in, I look to the past to see how I can move in the future. But the problem with it now is that the elders, quote unquote, have become corrupted. And many of these elders have basically taken the respect of younger people for granted. What do I mean by this? Well, many of our elders pretty much have no respect for any of their youngers. Now, keep in mind, I'm speaking from a Nigerian point of view because that is my lineage, but I'm willing to bet that this affects many other black people, not just in Africa, but all over the globe, particularly America as well. Older people having no respect for their youngers. This really is a part of what I've been talking about for the longest time, and that we really do have some of the worst parents in the world, whether you want to believe it or not. A lot of our problems that we have right now comes from having very bad parents who were very emotionally and mentally abusive without even knowing it. In many cases, physical abuse. And funny enough, a lot of people who have received physical abuse as kids, they look fondly at it, like, yeah, I deserve it. And that should tell you about how deep-rooted this abusive mentality is and how it bleeds into our future generations. The reason why I say F the ancestors is because while we uphold these people as if they were gods, in reality, the ancestors of Africans today and people in the diaspora today really didn't care about their future lineage. They really weren't that way inclined to care about the future. And we can see that with, for example, heinous things such as the slave trade, right? Not just the transatlantic one, the trans-Saharan one, and every type of slave trade where you are gonna trade human lives for things, okay? And in the case of Africans, they were for hundreds of years, very willing to trade human souls for trinkets. Like, go and do the history, go and see what Africans were trading people for. Sometimes even for salt. Obviously, at some point in history, trading slaves was common. But actually, many places in history, even in the medieval days, certain people were very resistant from having their own people sent as slaves. For example, the Japanese, when the Portuguese Jesuits came in looking for Japanese slaves, many of the Japanese clans or tribes were not having it. They didn't want it. They rebelled against it. Right? Over here in England, there is a song, we will never ever ever shall be slaves. You know, there is an air of rebellion against slavery. Even though in England and Japan, there was a very strong class system that pretty much treated their working class like slaves and servants, but still, they didn't want to see their people get shipped off like that. Another reason is the tribalism. You see, most places in the world at some point in time were tribal. England and Great Britain were petty, states and tribes. Japan, petty clans. Everywhere had petty clans, but there came a point in history when someone understood that, hey, in order for us to be strong, we need to be unified. We need to be one people. But this is something many African people fail to understand. And in many cases, the people who were warring with each other were actually familiar people. They were related people. There were people who could speak the same languages, people who pretty much looked the same, who had the same kind of ancestral worship. They were at war with each other. And so this created an air of animosity pretty much against your own people. When you combine that with the rampant slavery, especially the transatlantic slave trade, you have a skirmish of people with very low empathy against people who look like themselves and willing to defeat and raid and trade their people. And I think that this apathy has been bred into the future, to be honest. When you look at the way black people treat other black people, that apathy exists to this day. Some people want to call it self-hate, quote unquote. Whatever you want to call it, it exists. And it shows in our inability to create successful communities, to create successful nations, to be easily confounded and bamboozled by things like colonialism, whereas other people who've been colonized have made the decolonialization process much more straightforward and easier. But because we've been, a hodgepodge, zero unity type of people, we haven't had it that easy. So F the ancestors, because unfortunately these people have not done a lot or have not done much to be filled with pride for. That's just the truth. Down to our own parents, again, very abusive people. People who showed no plan for our future, especially us who were born in a diaspora, who were born outside of Africa. Again, I hit this topic so many times, but it needs to be repeated because parents will throw you in a situation where you really have no right to succeed in, right? But then they'll blame you for your lack of success, or they'll blame you for having, being quote unquote confused in terms of where you belong and where your country is. If you gave birth to your child outside of Africa and you yourself live in Africa, how do you blame your child for not being as African as you? This becomes madness. And to be honest, I don't understand now where all of this ancestral worship comes from, or if it's warranted. Worship your ancestors because they have given you something good. Such as my father, for example. I always appraise my father because he left his children a will, a heritage that we can build up from via his hard work when he was alive. That is a reason to praise your ancestors, but not when they do nothing. They come into the world and they expect you to pay their toll. Right down to their funeral. They have no will. Many of these parents have no will. They have nothing saved up. They've just been living in a zero-sum game life. But when it's time to party on the weekend, they will bring out all the gold, they'll bring out all the cloth, all the shoes and bags. They'll look on fleek. When it comes to these weddings, again, a show of decadence, on fleek. But when it comes to leaving something for your descendants, when it comes to showing your children love and care and complete support and unconditional love that isn't wrecked with favoritism, don't expect that to happen. So for me, and again, I say this as a parent, if my children grew up and said, "Oh, F you, dad," I would understand. If I show them the type of neglect that many of us have been shown, whether it's emotional, whether it's financial, yeah, I will understand. Look, I've been a crap parent. But what I won't do is try to guilt trip them. Pretend like, oh, I did everything I could. No, most parents probably didn't do everything they could. That's the truth. In fact, most parents just did the bare minimum. Most parents here in the UK are just recipients of benefits, and they have nothing more to aspire for because they don't read, they don't educate themselves properly. All they do is go to church, watch some Nollywood, and sleep. Eat, shit, sleep. There's no thought about tomorrow. There's no thought about the future. Complain about money. Asking, begging other people for money without understanding how they make their money. They just think money, if you make money, you're supposed to give me some. Many parents haven't worked for like the last 2-3 decades. They've just been sitting down getting child support, house support, all these benefits that you can accrue just by doing nothing. Absolutely pitiful, but it absolutely shows a person or a people that don't care about their descendants. They don't have a mind for their legacy. They don't have any pride in all of that. All they care about is themselves. And for me, this is a sign of a lot of a mentality that just needs a lot of therapy. There's a lot of trauma involved. And this is really the reason why I make these videos, is to break that cycle of trauma that is very much there in the minds of many black people. So yeah, when I say F the ancestors, again, I'm not trying to be salacious, I'm not trying to be controversial, it's just a fact. You don't worship your parents simply because they're your parents. This is another trap. All these biblical quotes, oh, honor thy parents. What if your parents are total sleazeballs? What if your parents are total nutcases? How do you honor a nutcase? Oh, but it's your dad. Oh, but it's your mom. No, it doesn't matter. If they're psychologically damaging you, you can't honor these people. But funny enough, religion is one of those mental traps that a lot of black people abide by. So you can't really talk out. And if you talk out, you're committing the big sin. Right? Meanwhile, the same pious people are going to be smashing raw the next day on Saturday night, just before they go to church. They're going to be in bed raw with some random person. And that's how many of us are born. Smashed raw by some random person. But anyway, what do you think? Let me know in the chat below. Until the next one.